Friday. You know, sometimes in these high-stakes political and legal dramas, the real earthquake hits not with a loud bang, but with a quiet envelope sliding across a courtroom clerk's desk. And that's exactly what happened this morning when Pam Bondi, the former Attorney General, took a step that has Donald Trump's entire inner circle uttering one chilling word in private conversations. Jail. I'm Rachel Maddow, and this is the kind of development that doesn't just ripple through the news cycle. It detonates right in the middle of 3 active federal proceedings, 1 secret audio recording, and what used to be 2 marriages that are now legally and strategically pulling in opposite directions. The recording, an 11-minute audio captured during a private dinner at Mar-a-Lago back in March 2023, landed in federal court chambers today, filed into evidence just 43 minutes before the White House was already being briefed. And from that moment forward, everything shifted. What started as quiet cooperation reports yesterday has become a full-scale flip by someone who once sat at the very top of the Justice Department. Let's talk about Pam Bondi for a second, because her move today isn't some impulsive leak. Reports from just yesterday indicated she had been working behind the scenes with the special counsel's office for 3 full weeks, quietly turning over internal DOJ memos from her own time running the department. People close to the situation described it as either a defensive maneuver or the beginning of something much bigger. 19 hours later, she delivered the Melania tape directly. That is not incremental cooperation anymore. That is a complete realignment. Her status has moved from potential witness to the central cooperating figure in this investigation, and Trump's team has gone from private frustration straight into public threats of criminal referrals. The sealed proceedings that were already on the calendar for Monday have now been fast-tracked into full emergency mode because of what she did. Here's how the day unfolded in real time, because the precision of these hours tells you how high the tension is inside the courthouse and the White House. At 8:14 this morning, Bondi's personal attorney, not a DOJ liaison, not someone operating through official channels, walked into the federal courthouse carrying that sealed envelope. By 9:02, it was logged into the clerk's evidence system under the appropriate case file. 45 minutes after that, at 9:47, Judge Hernandez issued an immediate gag order covering every single party connected to the filing, a move documented in the federal docket and confirmed by court officers who were there. That sequence is deliberate. Sending her own lawyer straight to the judge, bypassing institutional routes, signals that Bondi is protecting her own position first and foremost. If this had gone through official Department of Justice channels, it would have looked like the government itself was acting. Instead, this was an individual move, and that changes how everyone has to respond. The content of what she handed over is explosive in its relevance. The filing describes an audio recording from that March 2023 Mar-a-Lago dinner containing statements made by Melania Trump that go directly to the heart of the obstruction and document handling charges currently facing her husband. Bondi had obtained the recording during her tenure overseeing the DOJ's document compliance review, and she accessed it using her own official authorization codes. Every one of those details narrows Trump's legal options dramatically. They cannot credibly claim the material was improperly seized by rogue agents because the chain of custody traces back to her lawful authority. The timing, March 2023, fits squarely inside the window of the existing indictment, which means the only real avenue left is trying to attack Bondi's personal credibility. And attacking the credibility of a former United States Attorney General who accessed this lawfully is a steep hill to climb. This creates a classic trap for Trump's side. If they stay silent, the tape slides into evidence uncontested and shapes everything that happens in Monday's sealed hearing. If they come out swinging publicly against Bondi, they elevate her profile as someone willing to risk it all, turning her into a whistleblower figure in the eyes of many. It's lose-lose, and they know it. What's more, Bondi didn't stumble into this moment. 12 days ago, well before this week's escalation, she filed a formal immunity application with the special counsel's office. That kind of paperwork takes weeks of preparation. She had assembled this package in advance, calculated exactly when to deploy it. This was not a reactive panic move. This was controlled escalation designed to lock herself into protected status while delivering the most damaging evidence possible before anyone could block her. Within 2 hours of that envelope hitting the clerk's desk, the responses artade flying. Judge Hernandez's gag order came down at 9:47. By 10:23, Trump's lead attorney, James Trusty, had already filed an emergency motion challenging the tape's admissibility. At 11:34, just 1 hour and 47 minutes after the initial submission, the White House released a statement labeling Bondi's actions an unprecedented act of political betrayal and prosecutorial misconduct. That kind of speed means Trump was briefed before the docket even publicly updated. Someone inside the courthouse clearly tipped them off. 3 senior advisors, speaking anonymously, told Axios that the word jail was being used internally when discussing what should happen to Bondi, reflecting the president's personal fury. On Capitol Hill, House Judiciary Chair Jim Jordan immediately called for an investigation into her cooperation agreement, demanding answers about what immunity was offered and why. Four former federal prosecutors went on record describing this submission as a direct blow to the executive privilege doctrine. Even the Federalist Society released an unusual public statement highlighting serious separation of powers concerns. And the Senate Judiciary Committee scheduled an emergency closed-door session for Saturday morning to examine the whole cooperation agreement. Now, let's look at what Trump's legal team actually filed 4 hours after the tape reached the judge's chambers. They submitted an emergency motion arguing that the recording is shielded by spousal privilege and cannot be introduced without Melania Trump's explicit written consent. They also filed a parallel challenge to Bondi's standing, claiming her immunity agreement is invalid because it was supposedly secured under false pretenses. On top of that, they requested an emergency stay on Monday's sealed hearing until both motions are resolved. Those documents were entered at 1:58 this afternoon. What they're trying to achieve here is procedural erasure. Get the judge to suppress the tape entirely before anyone hears it, treating it as fruit of the poisonous tree. They're not contesting the contents on the merits yet. They're trying to prevent Monday's hearing from ever using the tape as its centerpiece, where witnesses would be questioned under oath. The risk, of course, is that it looks like they're actively blocking evidence, which in any normal case signals something to avoid. Their filing described the submission as a deliberate circumvention of established privilege protections that the court must honor. Translation: they don't want anyone listening, period. Whether this works depends entirely on Judge Hernandez, who has already shown through today's swift gag order that he's handling this with exceptional gravity. The pattern is clear. Bondi's submission triggered the emergency motions, which in turn forced the judge to rule before Monday. Both sides are now locked into a 48-hour window with a binary outcome that neither can pressure. If the tape is ruled admissible by Sunday evening, Monday's hearing moves forward with it in evidence, and Bondi testifies under oath. If it's suppressed, her cooperation agreement becomes the flashpoint, and the special counsel will appeal almost immediately, pushing everything to the circuit court. Once that hearing happens, whatever testimony is given becomes a permanent sealed record, feeding directly into future indictment decisions. We're already 4 steps deep into this spiral. Tape submission, emergency motion, judge's ruling, Monday hearing, and then the indictment track accelerates. Legal experts are weighing in fast. Former federal judge and constitutional scholar Lawrence Tribe pointed out that once evidence like this enters judicial review, suppression is extremely difficult unless the privilege claim is airtight. And spousal privilege has never successfully covered statements made to third parties in a group setting like the one described here. Even conservative commentator Jonathan Turley, who has been skeptical of some earlier moves in this case, acknowledged this afternoon that privilege arguments face a very high bar when others were present. Former Watergate prosecutor Nick Ackerman noted that cooperation deals involving former cabinet officials usually mean prosecutors already have the case built and are using the cooperator simply to confirm known facts under oath. In other words, the special counsel already knows what's on that tape. Bondi is there to put it on the record officially. While all eyes were on the back and forth Bondi and Trump's lawyers, something else happened at 3:44 this afternoon that neither side apparently anticipated. Melania Trump's independently retained attorney David Wolstone, who was brought on 6 weeks ago long before today, filed a statement asserting that his client never consented to the recording, never authorized its release, and is claiming spousal privilege on her own behalf as a third party. She is not a defendant in this case, not a cooperating witness. Is an independent actor with her own constitutional rights in the proceeding. Her filing makes clear that her interests are distinct from and not subordinate to anyone else's strategy. This creates legal distance from her husband's defense team. It also helps Bondi in a very concrete way. It confirms the tape's existence and that Melania is aware of it, which destroys any possible claim that the recording was fabricated. Now step back and look at the colliding strategies, because this is where the real drama lies. Pam Bondi's plan was to secure immunity and deliver the single most damaging piece of evidence she could before Trump's team had time to block her, locking herself into protected status and maximizing her value to prosecutors. She was willing to burn her political future, her Republican establishment ties, and her old loyalty to the former president. Trump's team, on the other hand, is focused on suppressing the tape through privilege claims, discrediting Bondi as a witness, and delaying Monday's hearing long enough for Congress to apply political pressure on the special counsel. They're willing to accept the public optics of looking like they're hiding evidence and to sacrifice whatever personal alliance remained with Bondi. And Melania's strategy through her own lawyer is to establish herself as a separate legal player, protecting her privacy and rights no matter how the rest of this plays out. She is willing to let the appearance of marital solidarity take a hit if it means preserving her independent options. There is simply no compromise that satisfies all three at once. That leaves Judge Hernandez with the responsibility of choosing a path by his Sunday evening deadline. And whoever loses that ruling loses strategic high ground heading into what has become a clearly accelerating indictment timeline. This kind of internal fracture inside a former administration isn't entirely new. Think back to 1973 when White House counsel John Dean flipped on Richard Nixon during Watergate. Dean began as the ultimate loyal insider, and Nixon's people tried to paint him as the lone architect of the cover-up, attacking his credibility at every turn. But once Dean delivered not just testimony, but actual documentation, the administration's defense started to collapse. Nixon resigned 14 months later. The timeline from Dean's cooperation to resignation was about 8 months. Former Watergate Committee counsel Fred Thompson once observed in testimony that the moment a loyalist flips and brings documentation, not mere words, but records, the entire defense posture of an administration becomes nearly impossible to sustain. We are at that Dean delivers the evidence stage right now. If history rhymes here, Bondi's submission will shape the indictment, the privilege motions will fail, Monday's hearing will proceed, and the obstruction case will harden over the next 3 to 6 months. The only way it breaks differently is if the judge suppresses everything Bondi provided and invalidates her immunity deal, something with no real precedent in post-Watergate jurisprudence. This development also chips away at long-held assumptions about how government power actually operates. Before today, most people believed cabinet-level officials kept internal materials inside the executive branch unless formally subpoenaed. Pam Bondi just demonstrated that a former attorney general can retain materials she had lawful access to, secure a personal immunity agreement, and submit them directly to a federal judge, bypassing every institutional safeguard. The president and his cabinet can, it turns out, become cooperating witnesses against the very administration that appointed them using official materials gathered on the job. If you ever trusted that executive branch confidentiality offered durable protection for sensitive conversations, today's events have substantially weakened that belief. When a former attorney general places a private recording of the First Lady into federal evidence and a court accepts it for review, the idea that executive privilege is an unbreakable shield has taken a very concrete, documented hit. So where exactly does the clock stand tonight? We have multiple deadlines converging fast. Tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., just 19 hours from now, the Senate Judiciary Committee holds its emergency closed-door session on Bondi's cooperation agreement. That carries political weight even if it lacks direct legal force. Sunday at 4 p.m., 67 hours away, Melania's attorneys must file their supplemental briefing on her independent standing. Sunday at 6 p.m., 70 hours from now, Judge Hernandez issues his ruling on the competing privilege motions. Trump's spousal claim, Melania's separate assertion, and Bondi's admissibility arguments. Then Monday, the sealed hearing either proceeds or gets postponed depending on that ruling. Legal analysts see 3 realistic outcomes. The tape could be admitted in full, allowing M. Bondi's hearing to move forward with the recording as central evidence. Bondi would testify about context and chain of custody, while Trump's lawyers cross-examine her under the gag order. Or the judge could go for partial suppression, admitting some portions while redacting others. So the hearing still happens in limited form, but still gets Bondi on the record under oath. Or he could grant full temporary suppression, delaying Monday's session while the special counsel appeals immediately to the circuit court, stretching the timeline by 2 to 4 weeks. Former prosecutor Renato Mariotti believes the middle path is most probable because judges in these high-profile privilege battles usually choose a balanced route that protects their own authority from quick reversal. There is also a potential wild card. Trump himself could try to invoke executive privilege directly, arguing that Bondi's access was granted under his authority and is therefore revocable. That argument has never been tested against a former official operating under her own immunity deal. So it would force an entirely novel legal question that might delay Sunday's ruling even further. And Melania's supplemental filing could introduce new details about whether she knew she was being recorded at all, potentially adding a Fourth Amendment dimension that complicates everything. I'm personally tracking 3 specific elements over the next few days. First, exactly how Judge Hernandez addresses Melania's independent privilege claim in his Sunday ruling. If he treats her filing separately from Trump's, he's recognizing her as her own legal actor, which likely means at least partial admission of the tape and Monday proceeds. If he bundles everything together as one marital privilege issue, full suppression becomes more likely. Second, whether Donald Trump makes any public statement before that ruling drops. Staying quiet would suggest his legal team still holds the reins. Speaking out would signal he's overriding them again, something that has complicated past proceedings. Third, the exact wording in Melania's 4 p.m. Sunday supplemental brief about consent. If she claims she had no idea the recording was happening, that introduces fresh evidentiary problems for Bondi and could slow the process. If she challenges only the release and not the recording's existence, the suppression effort weakens considerably. Sunday evening is the true inflection point. That's when we'll learn whether Monday's sealed hearing becomes the most consequential moment yet in this investigation, or whether the whole matter gets pushed into appellate courts and possibly June. Right now, Pam Bondi sits in protected status under her immunity agreement waiting to see if she testifies Monday. Trump's lawyers are battling on 3 fronts simultaneously: the spousal privilege motion, discrediting Bondi, and weighing an executive privilege invocation. Melania's team is asserting independent standing and may drop new facts about consent that shift the entire admissibility analysis. The special counsel's office remains publicly silent, but is reportedly prepping Bondi as if the tape will be allowed in. The tape itself is now permanently logged in the federal evidence system, no matter what Sunday brings. Bondi's immunity deal is filed and sealed beyond Trump's ability to undo with political pressure alone. This matters because it exposes how fragile some of the informal norms that hold the executive branch together really are. Once a former cabinet official demonstrates she can walk away with sensitive materials, strike her own deal, and deliver them straight to a judge, every future West Wing conversation carries a little more risk of becoming permanent evidence later. The public is watching a former loyalist turn against the president who appointed her using the system she once ran. The political cost for Bondi is enormous. Her standing in Republican circles is likely finished, but she has clearly decided her legal protection and place in the historical record are worth it. Trump is forced to argue in court that his own former attorney general cannot be trusted with materials she lawfully possessed. And Melania is signaling through her independent filing that she refuses to be treated as a mere extension of her husband's defense strategy. She has her own rights, her own privacy, and her own lawyer. I spent a lot of time tonight walking through the mechanics, the filings, the deadlines, the privilege claims, because in cases like this, the mechanics are what decide outcomes. The 48-hour emergency window, the gag order, the 3 colliding strategies, the historical echoes of Watergate, the weakening of executive privilege assumptions, every piece fits together into a picture of an investigation that is no longer abstract. It now has a piece of audio sitting in a federal judge's hands, and that judge must decide by Sunday evening whether the world gets to hear it in Monday's proceed. Or whether it gets buried for weeks in appeals. I'll be right here the moment anything breaks, whether it's leaks from tomorrow's Senate session, new filings from Melania's team, Trump weighing in publicly, or Judge Hernandez's ruling itself. Because this story isn't slowing down. It's speeding up with every passing hour. The decisions locked in over the next 72 hours will determine whether Pam Bondi walks into that sealed hearing as the government's key witness, or whether the entire process gets tangled in procedural delays that stretch this drama well into the summer. Thank you for staying with me through all these details. These stories are complicated, they move quickly, but they go to the heart of whether powerful people can shield themselves from accountability, and whether the norms that keep our government functioning can survive this kind of internal fracture. I'll see you Sunday night when that ruling drops. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, and I'll talk to you soon.